I was a child. The school that I attended was peculiar yet wonderfully interesting. Whether it was the fact that it was surrounded in places by overgrown bushes and opposite a strangely crooked wood that ignited my imagination, or perhaps the funny, eccentric, and sometimes fearsome teachers and kids that populated it, I do not know. I'm not sure of when it was built, but it certainly stood out from the houses and quiet streets that surrounded it, covered as it was in a bright, fiery red paint that drew your eyes to it immediately. There I went from the age of 5 up until I was 11 or 12, and like most children, I have both fond and cruel memories of it. Each day with a rucksack on my back, I would wander past the crooked wood and wave to the lollipop lady Mrs. Collins, a kind old woman whose job it was to stop traffic with her bright yellow sign, letting us cross in safety, and after meeting my friends, walk through the rusted brown gates into one of 2 playgrounds. It was rumored that in the past, the 2 grounds existed to separate boys from girls, both an understandable and utterly outdated concept. By the time I went to the school, the first playground had been assigned for those aged 5 to 8, and the second for those aged 8 and up. In the older kids' playground, there was a small red brick building that stood on its own, disconnected from the main school complex. It had long since fallen into disuse, and, in fact, had been sealed from prying eyes. Its doors and windows were walled up with stone and mortar, making it impossible to see what was inside. Its purpose seemed a bit of a mystery, as most of the teachers seemed to skirt around the topic entirely. But of course stories spread amongst the wild imaginations of children, and in my school, this fondness for outlandish tales of tragedy and forbidden places often led to bizarre rumors and whispers, particularly pertaining to the sealed building. Obscurity is a fertile ground for the fantastical ruminations of youth. When me and my friends were in the younger playground, we would sometimes sneak down a narrow passageway, which would lead to another, and peek around the corner. There we would see the older kids playing football or just hanging around. It is amusing how younger children look to their older peers, thinking that they seem to be having so much more fun than us. But before we would be chased away by the janitor or a passing teacher, my eyes would always lead to that sealed building. There was something lonely about it, isolated, and while it was surrounded by the yells and vibrancy of a schoolyard, its appearance suggested a grave silence to me. Some of the older kids liked to scare themselves and us, and told us dramatically that it had been used as a science department, and that there had been a hideous accident there, one that had produced strange and gruesome things that had to be kept from the world. Even as a child of 8, I knew made-up nonsense when I heard it. Then there was the account that it had been a previous and rather brutal head teacher's office decades earlier, and that he had died there in a fire. His ghost obviously still haunted the place, and it was better that the vengeful old sod be contained there, fuming at his desk as children enjoyed themselves and played nearby. Again, utter garbage. There was, however, one account of why the place had been abandoned, which seemed more plausible to me. The building was, in fact, a toilet. Yes, a normal toilet. No frills, no secret laboratories, no dead spirits of an overbearing head teacher. It had simply been sealed up when new facilities were installed in the school to stop the children from climbing inside and getting up to mischief. But yet, despite this mundane explanation, there were still, in fact, tales to be told about the brick, disconnected building in the older kids' playground. Although I had heard the stories, it wasn't until I was in my 4th year of the school that I became intimately, and at the time, uncomfortably involved with them. The older kids' playground was flanked on 3 sides by a rectangular section of the school itself, with the 4th side separated from neighboring houses by a moldy and dark red wall. It was isolated from the other playground, other than the aforementioned passageway, and to further the feeling of imprisonment, was characterized by tall metal fencing that rose up in places where a brave classmate might have attempted their great escape. Yet there was one old gate that did allow access of sorts, but like prison guards, the teachers tended to check on it regularly. There, in the corner of the grounds, lay the old building. Its windows were indeed enclosed in brick, as were its 2 doors, But the roof seemed unusual to me, being flat in places and surely gathering puddles of rainwater during the wetter seasons. I was at that age, and embarrassingly still to this day, terrified by heights. And it was much to my horror when I discovered that climbing up onto the roof of the old toilets was seen as a rite of passage of some sort. Don't misunderstand me. We weren't forced to go up there, but children can be cruel, and when someone new to that playground showed weakness or fear, this would often result in them being picked on. Over the coming weeks, I watched as each of my friends climbed up onto the roof when the opportunity presented itself, dangling their legs over the sides nonchalantly once up there, one by one claiming their right to be in the older playground, while I succumbed to ever-increasing taunts about my fear and cowardice. Don't disbelieve me when I say I did try. Several times, a ball would be kicked accidentally onto the roof, and my classmates would turn to me to retrieve it. I even made it up the side of an old drainpipe on a few occasions, far enough to reach my hand up and over to touch the roof's surface. Yet, each time, I would fail. Fear would grip me, and with each admission of defeat, the name-calling and embarrassment intensified. I can trace back a curious, and probably detrimental, aspect of my personality to that time. You see, failure in front of strangers to this day does not bother me, but friends, family, even acquaintances. The very idea makes me break out in a cold sweat. Later in life, I followed the stereotypical path of chasing fame as a teenager, and I would have no problem playing in bands in front of those I did not know, but put a familiar face in the audience, and my nerves would take hold. The stakes of failure would be raised that much higher, in my mind at least. For this reason, I chose an odd time to truly face my fear. One day after school, I waited outside the gates, watching as the other children slowly siphoned out of the two playgrounds, kicking their feet through the autumn leaves. Parents escorted the youngest of my fellow students, while those of an older age walked with their classmates, some eagerly, others not so, making their way down the hill, past the woods, to their homes in the surrounding area. As the school became ever emptier, and the teachers themselves began to leave, I walked down the street, entering the gardens at the back of the building. I always found the rear of my school to be an interesting place. It consisted of shrubs, bushes, and an old ash football pitch. Our teachers never seemed to use the area for anything, and we were actively encouraged to keep clear of it. Again, there were stories amongst the students that a child had been abducted while playing there years previously. Whether that was true or not, I do not know. Once I was as certain as I could be that everyone was gone, I sneaked through the bushes up a small incline to the rear of the playground. There, embedded in the wall, was the narrow brown gate, which the teachers kept a watchful eye on but, as far as I knew, was never used. I assumed that it had served a legitimate purpose years previously, but for me and my friends, it was the place where we would climb over to run around the school grounds at the weekend when no one was there. It was an exceptional place to play one-man hunt with so many nooks and crannies to hide in. As cautious as I was, I wanted to truly attempt to get up onto the roof of the old toilets. In my 8-year-old head, I had visions of sneaking up there in the morning and surprising my friends or running up there to heroically retrieve a girl's ball. In childhood, we think that those around us really care about our actions, but in truth, they are of little consequence to anyone other than ourselves. Yes, I had been bullied a little for not being as strong or as fearless as those around me, and that sense of public failure and insecurity, while a potent sensation at a young age, and in hindsight, completely exaggerated, was enough to give me the courage to at least attempt the climb. I had considered asking one of my friends to join me as I was nervous that a teacher might still be there, that I would get into trouble, and so needed a lookout, but this would only have given me someone to fail in front of. I decided to attempt it on my own. After waiting for what seemed an age, I slowly climbed over the gate, which rattled unnervingly under my movements, echoing out around the playground. Then, after hesitantly observing the hundreds of windows that dotted the school for movement, and being happy enough with the absence of light emanating from them, I stepped silently to the sealed building. Even though I knew that as little as an audience of one could affect my confidence, I partly wished that I had not been alone, as the building and its deserted surroundings left me feeling uneasy. I knew, however, that if I just got up there once, I would have conquered my fear and would be able to climb up onto the roof with ease in the future, hopefully putting any name-calling to rest. I stood staring at the drain pipe, which would be my avenue to success, clinging as it did through rusted fittings to the side of the building. My mind back then was often clouded with the worst possibilities, focusing on the most negative outcome, and as I began to climb slowly, I imagined that the drain pipe would wrench away from the wall, throwing me against the concrete ground at any moment. The truth is that it did not move, no matter how much I believed that it did. Without a witness, I was now as far as I had ever reached, able to stick my hand up above me and touch the edge of the roof. My heart raced with excitement as I began to believe that I really could do it and that success was in sight. I then made the mistake of looking down to check my progress. The experience of height is something difficult to convey to someone who has no problem with it. While in reality, I was probably no more than 7 or 8 feet off the ground, I perceived this as a monumental distance. I felt my stomach churn, my heart beat erratically, and the world below began to spin and distort. Worse still, a loss of nerve permeated my body, leaving me feeling weak, and I could feel my grip begin to loosen. It is strange how the mind works, for just as I was ready to admit defeat once more and retreat, the insults and jeers of my classmates rang throughout my awareness as if they were present, down there, taunting me. With what was for me a huge effort, I found myself continuing to climb upwards, my hands reaching out to the damp roof, and then before I knew it, there I was. Letting out a laugh of excitement, a sensation of relief washed over me. I could not wait for the next day. To be up there on the roof, proving those who had been cruel to me wrong. Peeking over the edge, I still felt trepidation at the height, but nowhere near as much as I had done before, my triumph quelling my anxiety. Still, I was not too keen to remain there for long, so I decided to investigate my surroundings briefly, then climb back down to the safety of the playground and head home, ecstatic. The roof was painted in a similar fiery red color to the main school building, but it had long since peeled and cracked, suggesting that it had been a long time since someone had been up there to give it a new coat. Standing up cautiously, I felt my legs waver slightly as my stomach churned again at the thought of how high up I was. Laughable, really, as the height of the roof was probably no more than 10 feet. Yet, no matter how nervous I was, the sense of triumph that I felt coursing through my body was truly wonderful. I walked slowly from one side of the roof to the other, careful not to trip as I did so. The short walk from the drain pipe to the opposite ledge and back filled me with a feeling of conquest, as of someone patrolling their territory. For those brief moments, that roof and that building were mine. Just as I turned to finally make my way back to the ground, I noticed that in the middle of the roof there was a hole. I'm not sure how I hadn't noticed it before, although it was quite small, big enough for me to fit my hand through and little else. Curious, I took a few careful steps and then knelt for a closer look. Yes, there was a hole, and the light from the evening sky passed straight through it, illuminating what lay inside. I put my eye as close as possible to the opening without blocking the light and was surprised by what I saw. Down there in the darkness, like a perfectly preserved tomb, the old-fashioned white tiling remained intact. I could see the sinks where students years ago once washed their hands or flicked water at one another for amusement, and 3 stalls, cubicles with strong dark brown doors, lying there as if still used. The air inside was tinged with dust and age. Yet if someone had told me that the building had been sealed only the day before, I would have believed them. All but for one thing, a layer of stagnant water covered the floor, no doubt accumulating there from rain dripping in through the opening in the roof. Then I became aware of a strong smell, one that left my eyes stinging slightly and my mood apprehensive. Yes, there was no doubting it. Someone was smoking a cigarette nearby. My heart sank as I lay there motionless, cursing myself for taking too much time on the roof to celebrate my victory. A teacher, or perhaps the janitor, must have stayed behind to work late and was probably standing in the playground below. I thought that they must have been close, as the smoke smelled thick and oppressive. I lay curled up on the cold, wet concrete, waiting for whoever was there to leave. The now almost caustic smoke seemed to be increasing in strength, and several times I had to hold my breath, frightened that I would cough and be caught. I do not believe I exaggerate when I say that I lay motionless for half an hour, yet it took me all that time to make a simple yet unsettling observation. While I could smell the smoke, indeed, I felt as if I was inhaling just as much as the unseen smokers themselves. I couldn't see it. I would have expected to have seen the smoke rise up and over the roof, but not even the slightest wisp was evident. The autumn sky was now dimming, and I grew frustrated as the cold, damp stone below me sent chills through my body. Wishing that I had never gone up there in the first place, I felt hunger approaching and knew that by now my parents would be worried about me. I persuaded myself that I could at least dip my head over the edge of the roof and quickly take a look to see who was there. Maybe if they were on the other side of the yard, I could climb down unseen. I slid across the roof as quietly as I could and slowly peered downward, sure not to make any sudden movements to attract attention. There was no one there. The playground was empty, and the darkened windows of the main school building seemed as vacant as they had done before. Yet the smell and taste of cigarette smoke still filled my lungs and stunned my eyes. Then I witnessed something that rooted me to the spot. A single curling strand of smoke slid upward through the hole in the roof. Someone was down there. Someone was inside that room beneath me. This seemed impossible. As far as I was aware, there was no way inside. The building had been sealed off perfectly from the outside world, yet there it was, a puff of cigarette smoke that escaped first from the mouth of someone unseen below, and then through the hole in the roof to where I had been lying. My triumph of finally facing my fear of heights seemed a distant memory, and now all I could think of was getting off of that roof to safety down below. But the hole lay between myself and the drainpipe, and curiosity being as gripping a mindset as any, I decided to take a quick look inside before quietly making my escape and leaving the building behind. As I approached the opening, the smell of smoke grew stronger still, and as I peered inward, the thought of "don't look" filtered through my mind. But it was too late. I had looked. At first, there was nothing. The room below seemed darker than it had before, but this could be explained by the dimming sky and my eyes adapting to the change. What could not be explained was the noise I heard coming from inside. It seemed distant at first, indistinct and uncertain. Then it gradually took form, to me sounding like someone choking. I smiled to myself, thinking that it was probably the cigarette smoke, and that maybe some local kids had a den down there. But then suddenly, in the gloom, my eyes were drawn to one of the cubicles. Its door was closed, and yet I was not convinced that it had been before. I tilted my head closer to the hole, but my angle of view shrouded the inside from inspection. As the choking sound increased in volume, so did the smell of smoke. Then sound and smell were joined by something that chilled my very soul. I panicked and let out a cry as the door quivered with impact, as if someone were violently kicking it from the other side. Smoke now filled my lungs, and as my eyes watered, I could barely see anything both inside the building and out. Then it stopped. The choking sound had disappeared, and the smell of smoke had simply vanished. For a moment, I started to think that I had imagined it all. I gasped for air, drawing deep into my lungs, only for terror to take me once more. In the dark silence, in the cold, damp, and forgotten room below, the sound of footsteps in the water filled the air. Then, the cubicle door slowly began to creak open. I can't say entirely what took place after that. I believe I blocked much of it from my memory. Apparently the headmaster, an intimidating yet kind man by the name of Mr. McKay, had been in his office working late on the other side of the building. When he was disturbed by the sound of my screams, He rushed outside and found me on the roof, curled up into a ball, paralyzed with fear and sobbing. After some reassuring words, he helped me down and took me to his office, where he once again guaranteed that I was safe. He then called for my parents to come and pick me up. I trusted Mr. McKay implicitly, and as I'd fought the tears back, I described everything that had happened. The roof, the smoke, the cubicle as I told him my story. The blood drained from my headmaster's face. I have long thought about what he told me in that office after hearing my account. Perhaps he wished to frighten me so that I and others would never venture up there again. And looking back, it does seem like a strange thing to share with an already frightened child otherwise. But he seemed genuinely disturbed by the events I had conveyed to him. He told me that years before I went to school, there had been a tragedy involving a 12-year-old girl, one who he refused to name. She had a reputation for being difficult. The teachers tried their best, sympathizing with her as she came from an abusive background. But they found her almost impossible to control, as she often threatened violence and had been suspended several times for fighting with other students. One day she decided to skip a class and managed to persuade 2 other girls to join her by promising them a cigarette each. So, as the story went, the girls sneaked away when the bell for class rang and hid in the toilets. The details of what occurred afterwards were less than forthcoming, but what was clear was that the poor girl had a seizure of some kind and died there and then. The other girls claimed that they had already left before this happened, but there were rumors and accusations of which most only whispered, but many believed. It was suggested that the girl had been with her friends when the seizure took place, and out of fear of getting caught smoking and skipping class, they lifted their friend into the stall, closed the door, and then left her there. Whether they believed that she might recover or not was the subject of much speculation. The scratches and bashes on the inside of the cubicle suggested most definitely that she had continued to convulse while there, perhaps even in an uncoordinated attempt to escape and call out for help. In the aftermath, the building was closed off, and the school and community attempted as best they could to put the tragedy behind them. Perhaps Mr. McKay made the whole thing up just to terrify me, taking what I had thought I'd experienced and using it to concoct a story designed to scare me away from ever going back to that place. Unfortunately, a few unwelcome things transpired after that. I did indeed avoid the roof of that sealed building at all costs. My fear of heights was nothing compared to the dread that building then held for me. My schoolmates, of course, did not believe my version of things, accusing me of lying about the entire story just to avoid being made fun of. As far as they were concerned, I never got up there. Lastly, I did have a recurring dream throughout my childhood, one which I would wake from in a cold sweat, curled up in my bed, screaming. I know that in it I would be lying on that roof, peering down through the hole into that abandoned place, but the memory always seems vague somehow. All that is left is the impression of a cubicle door creaking open and something staring up at me from within. The red lights are only making the pain worse. It is an immense, earth-shattering pain in my midsection and in my head. I try to move, but I can't. I try to speak, but I can't do that either. It hurts too much, and my voice obeys me no more than do my joints, my muscles, my bones, or my mind. And yet still, there is movement. I can feel myself being lifted up and placed on something, a bed, maybe or no. A gurney. All right, one of the EMTs says, and several others then roll me into the back of an ambulance and climb in behind me. But I'm already fading fast and feeling an inexplicable heat by the time those doors are shut. One EMT, a blonde woman, shoots me a curious little look just as I'm slipping away and says aloud, "Wait, I think I know. We're made of that stuff, right?" I turned around. There was a woman there, red-haired and about my age, give or take, and she was alarmingly beautiful. But how long she'd been staring at the exhibit alongside me, I had no idea. "I'm sorry," I said. "You know we're made of that stuff, right?" She nodded at the museum wall, which depicted in detail the births, life cycles, and deaths of stars. I pursed my lips. "We're made of stars." "Yep. Isn't it awesome?" She stepped up beside me and moved her arm across the diagram as she spoke. "I just watched a documentary about it last night. Stars are just fusion factories held together by their own gravity. They start off fusing hydrogen to helium, and then they keep going on, fusing heavier and heavier elements until they're fusing the heaviest stuff. Then they exhaust their fuel and collapse under their own weight, and they'd blow off their outer layers and pretty much shower the galaxy with all these random elements, some of which are eventually used to create life." "Huh. Yeah. I'm Robin, by the way." She extended her hand, and I shook it. Hey, Brian. Nice to meet you." There was an awkward pause before I said, "All right, I got one for you. If you replaced the sun with a black hole, what would happen?" "Depends on its mass." "Nope. The answer is, drumroll, please, nothing. I mean, everything would get dark and cold, but we wouldn't fall in. Earth's orbit would remain entirely unaffected. If the black hole had the same mass as the sun, what you said would only be true if the black hole in question happened to have the same mass as the sun, which it wouldn't, because the sun isn't massive enough to collapse into a black hole." "Oh, damn. Yep. Me 1, you 0. Sorry, pal." "All right," I said. "You're on. Whoever gets the most points by closing time buys drinks." She smiled at that and punched me in the shoulder, just light enough not to sting. "All right, loser, come on," the EMT says. There is a flurry of activity around me, and there are voices, too, blinding lights, and a cooling down of that monstrous heat. One of the paramedics is looking me over. Then he looks at another colleague, the blonde woman, and he shakes his head slowly. "This one's gone, Rachel." But she continues running tests, running diagnostics, and placing a soft hand on my arm in case I'm awake enough to appreciate the comfort. I am. Barely. But I'm fading fast, and that heat is coming right back as I do. "Not yet." "He's not," she says. There's pain in her voice that she does her fruitless best to conceal. "I already lost one earlier, Todd. I'm not losing." "Another one," Robin said, and I laughed and agreed, and we rushed to the back of the line. "See, I told you you'd like Ferris wheels. I can't believe you've never been on one before today." She shrugged. "I never thought they were as extreme as roller coasters, so I wasn't interested." "Well, they're not supposed to be extreme. Ferris wheels are for all the parents waiting on their kids and sick people trying to relax their stomachs so they don't puke funnel cake all over the pavement. And adorable young couples, apparently." And just then, we were waved into the next seat. We sat ourselves down, and moments later the great wheel began to groan and protest, and finally to turn. It dragged our cart around its underside and then lifted it up to the top of its crest, where we could see the whole city at twilight, the ships in the harbor that were backlit red with the setting sun, and the clouds that were lined at their tops with just a little bit of starlight. Robin snuggled up next to me and put her head on my shoulder, and I put my arm around her waist. For a moment, then, I could have sworn the empty seat in front of us moved on its own and furrowed my brow. But then Robin spoke. "Thank you for being here with me," she said. I didn't respond with words. I just kissed her on the head and held her tight as the wheel began taking us. Down on the 1800 block of Gartersdale, one of the EMTs says, Yeah. Another one, I know. Hell of a fucking night, isn't it?" The conversation is muffled again in short order. I'm drifting in and out, but the jostling of the room and the sound of an engine tell me we're still in the ambulance. The other paramedics, for their part, continue running tests, and checking my vitals. And as they work, I try to remember what's happened. But it hurts. Damn it, does it hurt? Almost as much as that rushing heat. And is the effort further disrupted when the ambulance hits a bump in the road and I nearly spill out of the gurney. But Rachel puts her steady hand on my chest and says, "Hang in there, Brian. We're almost there." Robin pointed at the interstate ramp, and I took the turn and put Street Thomas Vineyard away in the rearview. "I still can't believe Mason got married," I said. "He's only known that girl for what, a year? Less." Robin shrugged. They were in love. They hardly knew each other. They don't know if whatever they're feeling is genuine, lifelong love, or just a new relationship that hasn't worn off yet. I guarantee it, and I'll put money on this. They'll be done within a year. Just watch. "You don't know that," she said. There was a brief pause, and then she added, "We've been dating for 2 years. So, how far off do you think we are?" I shrugged. "I don't know. I haven't really thought about it." "You haven't thought about it? At all?" "I mean, of course I've thought about it. I don't know if we're ready, you know." I looked over at her, but she just stared out there at the rain with her chin in her palm. So I continued, "Think about it like this. People prepare their whole lives for jobs, right? They start going to school as soon as they can talk, and they're not done till they're in their 20s, and it's all so they can get a piece of paper that says, 'Hey, hire my ass. I'm smart enough to work.' But marriage, nobody trains for that shit. People just hook up and say, 'Hey, we're 25 or 28. You're cute. I'm cute. Let's spend $15,000 on a giant ceremony and then live as glorified roommates for 5 years until we're both fat and hate each other and get divorced because neither one of us knew or cared how much work this thing would require." There was a longer pause then before she said, with a degree of seriousness I wasn't in the least bit prepared for, "Is that where you think we're headed? Glorified roommates." Quickly, I calculated an avenue of retreat, but I calculated wrong. "No, not you," I said. "Not us. I mean, most people, you know. Most people just dive in and either get divorced or stick it out till someone gets heart disease. The divorce rate is now more than 50% in the US, but the 'I don't love you anymore' rate, shit, that's probably close to 90 by the time everyone hits middle age. I just want to make sure you're the right person, you know." If ever there were words I wish I could have taken back, it were those 12. She said nothing, but I saw her reflection in the window. And the little tear that welled up in the corner of her eye said more than words ever could. "Listen, that came out wrong. I just meant, can you drop me off at my car, please? I thought you wanted to come over. I don't feel good. Please." And we drove in silence for a while as the rain picked up its pace and fell in sheets and torrents. After another 20 minutes, I made the turn onto my street and parked, and once I did, she got out without so much as a glance and walked across the road to her own car. I ran to follow. "Robin, wait." I grabbed her lightly by the arm. It was slick with rainwater. "Talk to me, please." "What do you want?" I blinked. "I want you to talk to me. No. I mean with us. Where do you want this to go?" "Where do I want this to go?" "I want to be with you." "Listen, I didn't mean to imply that I don't want that. I just want us to be smart about it. You know, well, maybe love isn't something you can calculate on a fucking spreadsheet, Brian." She was shouting over the cacophony of the storm. "Maybe it's just this thing you feel, you know. And maybe it doesn't make any damn logical sense. Maybe it's not supposed to. But that's part of what makes it special. It's an adventure. It's a jump off a cliff with me type of thing. And yeah, sure, not everyone survives the fall, I guess. But if you find the right person, then a jump off the cliff with me type of adventure. Come on, Robin. We're not writing up a damn dating website profile here. This is real life. There are kids involved, finances, house buying, mortgages, and all that shit. Not every day is some cute little romance comedy. This is half your life we're talking about. 2/3 even. Okay. All I meant was that you have to be prepared for it. I thought we were prepared. What do you mean? She dug through her purse for a moment, and then held up a ring that was brilliant even when covered in the rain. I felt my heart skip at least a full beat. Is that, It was my mom's, she said. She gave it to me before she died. She said, find your partner in crime, Robin. Find someone who'll sweep you off your feet and jump off a cliff with you. There was a pause before she added, and at the time she said it, I thought I knew exactly who that person was. I tried for a moment, but I knew, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that there was no combination of words in the English language that could be strung together to write this ship. Goodbye, Brian. She kissed me on the cheek and rubbed the back of her hand on it. And then she turned, got in her Civic, and drove off until I couldn't see her taillights at all through the pouring of the rains coming down hard. Boys, another of the EMTs said, careful when you unload him. There were grunts of acknowledgement, and then the back of the ambulance flew open, and the sound of the storm utterly exploded into it. I felt the rush of wind and the rain pelting my skin in sheets, and together they helped a bit with the oncoming heat that I still couldn't place. And then I felt movement. The gurney dipped and hit the pavement while the paramedics held me down. And then there were shouts, lights, and running feet, and then the hospital door. Open, I shouted. The man behind the counter shot me a look, but I shouted it again over the sound of rainfall and through the glass. I said, are you open? And then he pointed at the sign saying the opposite and went back to reading. But I wasn't taking no for an answer. I dug out my wallet, pulled a 20 from the fold, and slapped it flat up against the glass. Within seconds, the paper was soaked with rainwater. But it got his attention, and he rolled his eyes, and the door clicked, whirred, and slid open. Make it quick, man. I know. I will. Thank you so much. I ran down the aisles, and then, true to my word, made it back to the counter in less than a minute. The man put down his book and processed the sale. Date night. He said this as he bagged the card after the flowers. I smiled a bit. Something like that. And then I thanked him, ran back up to my car, got inside, took out the card, and scribbled on its inner sleeve the words, jump off a cliff. With me. A doctor running alongside the cart motioned to some nurses in the hall, and they ran to follow. He turns to the EMTs. Is he stable? He's slipping. Heart rate's falling, and breathing is slowing. Not good. Mumbled something about being too hot earlier, but if anything, his temperature's too low. Someone shows the doctor a chart. He reads it as he runs, and his face is grim. Shit. All right, he says. Let's move. I shout at the car I'm passing. Just a little rain, assholes. But it wasn't. It was a lot of rain. Sheets and buckets and torrents of it. In fact, it had long since turned the dirt to mud, and it swept up against my windshield like ocean surf, and the road was slick with little rivers of it that ran on down past the pebbles. I was going far too fast for such conditions. But I didn't. I care about that, the doctor said. I just want to get his fluids up. Rachel. The woman from the ambulance runs up and discusses my condition in harsh whispers with the doctor. As I fade and the damn heat floods back in, it becomes impossible to hear what they're saying. But it's abundantly clear from the body language that she hasn't yet given up. Hope for a reunion with these guys. Well, Bolin and Snake say they're against it entirely. So that doesn't bode well. But on the other hand, Sebastian said on multiple occasions that he's willing to do it for the fans. And look what happened with Guns N' Roses. A few years ago, nobody would have thought they'd get back together. I switched the radio off and then wrapped both hands around the wheel with such force that the knuckles turned white on the grip. The car hit 70 miles per hour, 75, 79. The windshield wipers were flying, but they weren't going fast. I slammed my foot on the brakes as the lights of activity on the road came in out of nowhere from the rain. The car jolted and shuddered and fought for traction with the pavement, and I felt the tires squeal and the metal of the car grind in. Protest. I don't care if he wants to protest. The doctor snaps back. You tell him to wait in the damn lobby like everyone else. The nurse accepts her orders and heads back out into the hallway. I'm sorry, sir, she says. You can't see him until... Until what? That's my son in there. That's my son. That's... And then there's a scuffle of feet and more shouts as a security guard drags my father from the wing. Rachel pauses as she hears the shouts, and then her eyes well up a bit with tears, and she looks at my face and appears to realize something. But she doesn't say what the shouts continue, but they fade. And so do I. And in comes the heat as I do. That's my son. Dad says, that's my boy. Let me see my boy. Stop. Please, stop. The police officer had both hands up as my car barreled towards him. Stop. Stop the car. Finally, there was a jolt and a shudder as the tires gained control, and the car slammed to a halt. Both the officer and I sighed in relief, and then he approached my window and tapped the glass with his knuckle. I lowered it. I shouted over the rain, I'm sorry, sir. Roads are crazy out here. You okay? He ignored the question. I'm going to need you to sit here for a bit, okay? He said, just until the accident's cleared up. Accident? It's bad. He nodded in the direction of the wreckage, and then he said again, just sit tight. We'll wave you over when there's an open lane. And then he ran off into the storm. I scanned the scene. There was a man on the side of the road. I saw sitting on the pavement with a poncho for the rainfall and his head in his hands. His SUV was totaled. The front end was bent, twisted, and hideously mangled. But the other car was in far worse shape than that. I squinted hard and could only make out panels of white amidst charred black chunks of metal and the force of the rain. But it was enough. It was a Civic, oh God. Oh God, no. No, no, no. I got out of the car and left the door hanging open in the rain. And then I ran forward, at least until the officer caught sight of me and ran back over and grabbed me by the shoulders. Hey, he said, I told you to wait in the car. What are you? Robin, I shouted over him. Robin. And then I saw it. A fleeting glimpse of movement. A white sheet flipped on a gurney. A strand of red hair fell from the right side and hung there as the EMTs carted away the body. Robin, I screamed. That's my girl. That's my girl. The officer was confused and stunned and did the only thing he could think to do, drag me back to my car. No, stop. I was inconsolable, but in no shape at all to resist. Stop, please. That's my girl. Let me see my girl. Please, stop. One of the EMTs, covered in blood from the waist up, turned to look at the spectacle. But then someone shouted her name. Rachel. The doctor says, you with us, or what? Let's go. She blinks as she stares at me, and then says, yeah. Sorry. I just realized this guy was... Just get the charcoal, please. We don't have time. And she does. She runs off to fetch exactly that. And then I feel a hideously invasive sensation. A tube is being placed in my nose, and then I feel it falling down into my throat. I'm too weak to gag, but I somehow manage to clench my fist. A nurse sees the movement, and he holds me down to steady me. Whoa, whoa. Whoa, whoa, are you okay, man? My roommate stumbled back as I threw open the door. I charged past him. You're coming in hot. He said it again. You good, bro? But I ignored him. I went to the bathroom, and I leaned up against the sink for a long moment. I grabbed my temples, set my jaw, and sobbed without a sound, aching, racking, and heaving sobs. I heard a knock. Hey, man, he said. "You good dude. Anything I can get for you." Or, "I'm fine. I managed." It wasn't convincing in the slightest, but I didn't care. I opened up my phone. There was a text from Robin there from this morning. It read, "I love you." And they were all at once the most beautiful and the most painful words I'd ever read. I love you. I love you too. I'm coming. Hang on, baby. I'm coming. Then I backed out, found my dad in the contacts list, and typed, "I love you, Dad." Moments later, I got a response. "I love you too, son. You okay?" But I ignored it, and then I threw open the cupboard, and I grabbed a bottle of pills, a nurse said. Swallowed the whole damn thing. Lucky his roommate called it in when he did, but the doctor is incredulous. Well, that remains to be seen, now doesn't it? Then he turns to the door, wretch, and she pushes it open with her elbow before he finishes. I got it. I'm here. All right, he says, fingers crossed, people. Let's see if we can't save a psycho. There are isolated chuckles. Rachel, though, almost snaps at her superior for the insult, but then someone says, "Here we go." And then there is thick, wretched black stuff funneling down that tube and down into my throat. I'm almost desperate enough, but not quite strong enough, to resist it. I can feel it sliding, hitting bottom, pumping and pulsing. My heart rate is erratic. My breathing is erratic, and my ability to comprehend the situation is every bit as erratic. I struggle as much as I can against the restraints, but all my effort and all my strength of arms muster up not more than the faintest whimper. But Rachel hears it. She moves to my side, and she holds my head and says, in a soft enough whisper that only I can hear the words, "Don't follow her, Brian. Don't follow her. Please, Jesus. I need him here. I need this win." But I begin to fade all the same. One by one, as the spikes on the EKG slow to sporadic pulses, I see the nurses turn to each other and shake their heads. One by one. That is, until there is only a trembling Rachel there. And she's holding on for me tight enough for everyone in the room. "Call it," the doctor says, just as the darkness swirls in, and I feel like I'm starting to fall away. The conversation carries on as I pass. 2:32 a.m. One nurse says, but I can hear Rachel screaming in protest. "No, he's not gone. There's still time. There's still time to save him. There's still." But she's wrong. I'm already gone. Her voice and her face. Those things are behind me as I pass. They're fading away into the darkness that's consuming me, swallowing me whole, and throwing me to the winds. And just when the magnitude of the situation dawns on me, then comes the heat. There are monstrous amounts of it. It rips and tears, and scorches and scalds, and had I had the ability to scream out or even to breathe, I would have done so until my throat was hoarse. But then there is a new pain, a different pain. A hand reaches out of the blackness, and it grabs my left side forearm with such mighty force that the resulting pain eclipses that of the heat, and the nails of that hand rip right through the flesh. And then I'm being pulled, and there is a rushing wind. It is cool, refreshing, and beautiful, and suddenly I'm somewhere entirely else. I blinked. The darkness was gone, and the heat with it, and that sensation of being devoured. Instead, those things had been replaced with starlit clouds as far off in every direction as the eye could see. But my arm stung like hell all the same. I looked at it. There were nail marks, I saw. 4 deep cuts beneath the inner wrist, and a 5th on the side, in the shape of a hand. They bled a bit, and then I heard an all too familiar voice. "You okay?" I stood up slowly, and I turned, holding my damn stinging arm while I did it, and said, Robin, what was that?" That darkness, and the heat, and it's where you would have spent your eternity, Brian, had I not pulled you out. I had no words other than the weakest. "Thanks." "You know," she said, holding her own arm. Suicide's not exactly what I meant by jumping off a cliff. I blinked again and took a long, deep breath. Yeah, I guess I didn't think things through. I'm not sure you fully realize how much of an understatement that is. Well, maybe I don't. But you know what? I'd do it again, Robin. I'm serious. She nearly rolled her eyes, but I doubled down on the sentiment. What did I say? Out there on my street. I'm sorry. I mean it. I'm sorry. You were right. Love isn't about taxes, headaches, or just tolerating each other until we're 70. It's like your mom said. It's about sweeping your girl off her feet. It's about jumping over cliffs with someone, not knowing where you'll land, and not caring, as long as you get there together. And if this is where we land, wherever this is, I'm okay with that. And I leaned in for a kiss, but she stopped me with her hand before it landed, and I opened my eyes. I can tell you've been working on that speech for a while, she said, over and over again, in my head, in the car until I got to the scene of the wreck. I looked at the ground and then back up at her. And I realized, right then, that if you fucking left the earth itself, then I would too. So here I am. I was wrong too. She cut me off. What do you mean? About love. I was wrong. My mother was wrong. It's not just about crap you see in rom-coms and greeting cards, Brian. Again, I blinked. I know that. I know it's something you feel in your heart that defies logic and reason. Not something you can put on a spreadsheet. Like you said earlier, she sighed a bit and then said, "Can I show you something?" I guess so. Sure. And then she took my hand, and infinity rolled in and faded back out. And all of a sudden we were somewhere else entirely. Are we? On the Ferris wheel. Yep. Turn around. I did, and there we were, past Robin and past me, on the seat above and behind us. I remembered it like yesterday. We were staring out at the whole city at twilight, the ships in the harbor that were backlit red with the setting sun, and the clouds that were lined at their tops with just a little bit of starlight. I rustled in my seat a bit, and it moved and passed. I saw it, and thought he was about to speak. But before he did, past Robin said, "Thank you for being here with me," and got a kiss on the head. What do you see? Robin said, "Us. A year ago and change. I remember that day like it was yesterday. Your mom had just died. So I took you here. To get your mind off things. You did. That was the first day in months I'd felt truly safe and at peace. That was love. I know it was. And I still love you. Just this. It's a kind of love," she said, cutting me off again. "And it's absolutely beautiful when it lasts. But can I show you something else?" "Oh, okay." "Yeah." She took my hand again, and again, infinity itself rolled in and out like the tide, and then we were somewhere else. The hospital looked like St. Joseph's. "What do you see here?" I looked around. Nurses are running up and down the hallway. Doctors review notes and talk to their patients. "I don't know. A hospital." She nodded in the direction of a particular room. "Look in there." So I did. There was a woman on the cot. She was emaciated, hairless, and deathly frail, and the doctors inside were shutting off the last of the machines. "A dying woman," I said. "It looks like cancer." "Yep." "And what about there?" I looked down. There was a nurse crouched down in front of the same door and talking to a girl, 8 or 9 years old, if I had to guess, in silly voices. The girl had been crying, but the nurse managed to make her smile a bit, even as her mother died on the other side of the door. "It looks like a nurse comforting the little girl." "That's right," Robin said. "And that little girl will remember that nurse for the rest of her life, even if they never meet again, or so much as exchange names, as the lady who came to her in her darkest hour and made her smile." She turned to me. "That's love too, just as beautiful and just as precious as what we had. What's your point?" She didn't answer. She just stuck out her hand with a sad smile, and I took it. Infinity faded in and out a third time. And then we were in the waiting room. See that? Robin pointed to the corner of the room, and I squinted. Oh hey, what's Dylan doing here? He called the ambulance when you didn't come out of the bathroom, she said. He knew something was wrong, and when they drove you off, he followed them here. I have been standing there ever since, asking for information on you every time a nurse walks by. He's starting to annoy them. I watched my roommate for a bit, and sure enough, he grabbed a nurse and asked her a question that I couldn't hear. She said something pleasantly dismissive, and he nodded, then leaned his head back up against the wall and closed his eyes. Wow. I had no idea he cared that much. That's love too, Brian. Would you do the same for him? But she held out her hand again before I could answer, and I took it. For the fourth time, Infinity blinks. And then I was in the emergency room, looking down on myself. I was covered in vomit from the charcoal and the pills, but I was still too. Deathly still. Most of the nurses and the doctor were still walking out the door, but Rachel wasn't. She was crying openly now and making no effort to hide it. She reached for something. A needle, it looked like, or a syringe. What's she doing? You'll see soon enough, Robin said. But that's also love. She held out her hand once again and said, one more. And I took it. And then we were in the parking lot of the same place. The rain was coming down harder than ever. Turn around, Robin said. And I did. And then I stopped. There were no words. It was my father in his car. He was holding a Bible up to his chest with both hands, and he was crying in a way no child should ever have to see their father cry. And Robin said, that's the kind of love that can move mountains. I put my hand up against his window. He didn't seem to notice. He can't see you, Brian. Not from there. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. Okay, I said. I get it. I fucked up. And then she released my hand. And all of a sudden, we were back in the clouds again, under the stars. I wiped another tear before it fell. So now what? It's too late for me to go back down there. I'm already gone. Robin took another step forward and said, maybe not. And she put her hand on my temple, and my eyes rolled back. And then I saw it. Rachel and I are on a beach. Our child is playing out in the surf, and the sun hits her hair just right. And for a moment it is made of gold. And then the image fades, and another one takes its place. A birthday party. I have silver hair at my temples. Rachel does too. But it doesn't matter. Our little girl is turning 10. And then that image fades too, and is replaced by another, and another, and another, each one yielding another moment where someone loved someone else enough for it to break through the clouds and be seen forever, even if the moment itself lasted only for a heartbeat. Finally, there is an image of Rachel and myself on a porch as old as we are. And she holds my hand and says, I'm glad you didn't follow her. And I say back, me too. And I kiss her on the head. And then Robin pulled back her hand. And there we were again, standing out there in the clouds together. How did you do that? I asked. She shrugged. Time has nearly no meaning in this place. I've been here for a while, Brian, and yet the doctors haven't even left your operating room. Don't think too much about it. Just think about what you want. That, I said. Was that my future? She shrugged again. Could be. I don't know what you saw, and I don't need to know. Was it enough? I nodded, and she stepped forward again and said, then go and get it. I'll miss you too damn much. Well, there's nothing wrong with missing someone, she said. That just means love lasted a little longer than what ignited it. So go ahead and miss me. You owe me that much. Feel the loss. Stand up to the storm like a man. Memorize the pain. Learn it inside and out. And let it roll over you in waves and run its course. And then one day you'll wake up and realize you have scar tissue where the skin used to be, and you'll be stronger than the grief ever was. I can tell you've been working on that speech for a while. Like I said, I've been here for a while. And then she kissed me one last time, and for the briefest moment, all the little scars, cuts, scrapes, and nicks in my heart were filled up and made whole, and she said, "You're made up of the stars, kid. Now go light up the world." And then she was gone, Rachel. Okay, I'm not going to tell you again, but I shot upright before the doctor could finish the thought, and I gasped for air when I did and grabbed at my chest with more strength than I'd had in hours. There was a needle in it, a bolt of life to the heart, and Rachel broke down in tears when she saw me. "Well, I'll be damned," the doctor said. "Welcome back to the land of the living, son." And Rachel, she turned around. "Good work, kid. Made me proud." And he left, and she turned back to me and tried to hide a smile while she did it. "Hey there. How are you feeling?" "Better than dead." There was a pause before I added, "Hey, I'm glad you got your win." She took my hand and squeezed it. For a moment, she paused when she saw a scar below the wrist that looked like the result of fingernails dragging through flesh. But then she dismissed it and said, "I am too, and you'll get yours." "Okay, I promise you will." I said, "I know." And with that, she got up and left the room to go save someone else's life, while I took out my phone, opened up the most recent text, and hit reply. Am now.